same thing with translation, right? If you want to be controversial. It'd be better not to read them than to read them in translation. Because if you don't read them, you at least preserve them as markers of greatness. But once you translate them and adapt them, and you make them accessible, you erase the lastingness of them, and all that you have is the unending stream of Hamlets. Right? And Hamlet itself disappears. And so that's where she draws that argument to a close. It's worth taking a look at what she says on page 127. Before I do that, let me just turn to page 5 just for 1 second. Top of the page in the prologue. It is a society of laborers, namely our society. It's a society of laborers which is about to be liberated from the fetters of labor. Right? She's talking about automation, and we could now say robots and drones, which are going to do all of our work for us. The problem is that we identify as laborers, as workers. And this society does no longer know of those other higher and more meaningful activities for the sake of which this freedom would deserve to be won. Within this society, which is egalitarian because this is labor's way of making men live together, there is no class left, no aristocracy of either a political or a spiritual nature from which a restoration of the other capacities of man could start anew. Even presidents, kings, prime ministers think of their offices in terms of a job necessary for the life of society. And among the intellectuals, only solitary individuals are left who consider what they are doing in terms of work and not in terms of making a living. What we are confronted with is the prospect of a society of laborers without labor. That is the only activity left to them. Surely nothing could be worse. So what she's talking about here is we want to free ourselves from labor to do the higher things in life, but we no longer recognize the higher things in life, those things which make people immortal, those things which deserve to be remembered. And if you no longer recognize the higher things in life and you free yourself with lots of free time, there's nothing to do but consume. On page 127, she makes one of the first references precisely to artists. And she says, starting on 126, whatever we do, we are supposed to do for the sake of making a living, such as the verdict of society, and the number of people, especially in the professions who might challenge it, has decreased rapidly. The only exception society is willing to grant is the artist, who, strictly speaking, is the only worker left in a laboring society. She then has an interesting discussion of playfulness. She says, as a result, all serious activities, irrespective of their fruits, are called labor, and every activity which is not necessary either for the life of the individual or for the life process of society is subsumed under playfulness. In these theories, which by echoing the current estimate of a laboring society on the theoretical level, sharpen it and drive it into its inherent extreme, not even the work of the artist is left. It is dissolved in the play and has lost its worldly meaning. The playfulness of the artist is felt to fulfill the same function in the laboring life process of society as the playing of tennis or the pursuit of a hobby in the life of an individual. To the extent, and this happens a lot in my understanding of art, art identifies with playfulness or play, right? Art conforms to the laboring understanding of the artist as someone not serious. And for her, the artist is someone who needs to be deadly serious. Play is important, but not in the sense of being a hobby. And this idea of art as a hobby and being forced into being a hobby recurs throughout this book and is worth your paying attention to. She'll talk about it again on page 118. Is that what we just read? 118, she'll mention the idea of a hobby as well. So 117 to 118, she'll say, Marx predicted correctly, though with unjustified glee, the withering away of the public realm, and he was equally right that is consistent with his conception of man as animal operans when he foresaw that socialized men would spend their freedom from laboring in those strictly private and essentially worldless activities we now call hobbies. Okay, I want to turn to the section on work, which is the one most associated and connected to art. If labor is about life and about preserving life in a cycle of life that is ever recurring and therefore doesn't need to be excellent, just needs to stay alive, work, artifice, is where we create an artificial world of things. Now, it just so happens that humans are the beings that create things. Right? Lots of other beings are alive. Lots of other beings think. Lots of other beings are rational. Lots of other beings do lots of things we do. Right? It doesn't raise them up or lower us down to say that. But humans are one of the few beings that produce a world of things. So she says. Now, some do as well. Birds build nests. Other animals build nests. It's not like humans are the only beings that build things. But they build a lot more than other, at least so she thinks. And one of the things they do is they build some things that are useless, which doesn't usually happen in other beings. And those useless things they build, which are the most permanent, the ones that last the longest because they don't get used, the ones that give a certain lasting depth and objectivity to this world that we then, because they last so long, we come to take them for granted and see them as part of the common world. And thus immortal, are artworks. Acting men, which we'll discuss in the next section, need artists, she says on page 173. It's a little later, but I'll just point it out to you. We should at least look at it. On 173, she'll say, acting man needs homo faber, right? If the animal laborans needs the help of homo faber to ease his labor, so the laboring man needs working man to provide the tools that will ease his labor and make him happier and remove his pain. And if mortals need homo faber to erect a home on earth, to build our world, acting and speaking men need the help of homo faber. Homo faber is the making man, or the artisan, in his highest capacity. That is, the help of the artist, of poets and historiographers, of monument builders or writers. Because without them, the only product of their activity, the story they enact and tell, would not survive at all. In other words, actors, people who act and speak, it would disappear, and their actions would be meaningless in the world without artists who monumentalize, memorialize, thingify, storify what these acting and speaking people do and say. And so, acting and working go together in her work. I'm going to skip it because we don't have time, but I want to at least point out to you this section's on 168, some of my absolute favorite passages in this book, where she talks about the relation between art and thinking. And I would hope you have time to read it. She cites this wonderful poem by Rainer Maria Rilke, Magie, Magic. And the central lines are, wir leiden oft zu Asche werden Flammen, doch in der Kunst zur Flamme wird der Staub. We suffer often the flames become ashes. But in art, dust turns into flame. That's the magic of thinking and making that comes to be in an artist. I just can't resist saying this, one of the things on the side that she points out is that for this reason, an artist has to remain the most private of people. They cannot exist in either the social or the public spheres. And the reason is that in order to turn dust to flame, you have to see things so totally differently and uniquely that you have to live an isolated life. You have to live outside of the social and political sphere. You can observe it, and you must, but you have to retreat from it. And thus, artistry and thinking are united by being things that can only be nurtured in privacy. Thus, the loss of the private sphere and the public sphere go together for her. The reason poetry, she says, is the most human of arts is because it's the least thingly, and thus the least thingified. Art is in this tension, whereas on the one hand, it's thought made into things, reified into things. But poetry, because it can be constantly said and spoken, connects a human voice to it and resists the thingification, and yet, insofar as it becomes memorable, also is a thing. But it's a thing that is least like a thing, and thus, for her, the highest form of human art. So on page 173, I already read for you a little bit at the bottom, but I want to read a little more, because this brings us back to that uncomfortable stuff on excellence and immortality. The man-made world of things is in the middle of the page. The human artifice erected by Homo Faber becomes a home for mortal men, whose stability will endure and outlast the ever-changing movement of their lives and actions, only in so much as it transcends both the sheer functionalism of things produced for consumption and the sheer utility of objects produced for use. What art does, and the world of man-made things does, is create things that last, that bring us beyond consumerism and utility, and create a world that we think deserves to last. Life in its non-biological sense, the span of time each man has between birth and death, manifests itself in action and speech, both of which share with life its essential futility. Life dies, action and speech disappear. The doing of great deeds and the speaking of great words will leave no trace, no product that might endure after the moment of action and the spoken word is past. If the animal laborans need the help of Homo Faber, I already read this, acting and speaking men need the help of Homo Faber in its highest capacity as the artists, poets, historiographers, and monument builders, because without them, the only product of their activity, the story the Annandale can tell, would not survive at all. Okay. Action is the third mode of the human condition, faculty of the human condition. You have to get to be human, she says, not as human nature, but as we understood humans. You have to be able to labor, you have to live. You have to work, you have to create a world. But above all, you have to act. What does it mean to act? It means to speak and act in ways that are unexpected. What humans have is the ability to surprise, to be free. To be free and to act the same, she says in many, many places. Freedom is not a notion of the will. It's a product of acting in a way that is surprising. And that's where she sees the dignity of man to lay in man's ability to act. Without speaking and appearing, she says on page 176, without speech and action, men are literally dead to the world. This is on the bottom of 176. A life without speech and action has ceased to be a human life because it is no longer lived among men. Now what she means by that is, if you're so isolated and put outside of the world of men that no one can pay attention to you and you don't appear before men, you're no longer human. Now the model for this that she talks about is the concentration camp, where you are completely hidden from the world of men. But there is a way in which the rise of society on a lower level does a similar thing. It hides anything that's distinctive. The who, as she talks about, the actor, it hides who that is behind a superficial member of society. All right, on page 180. I'm sorry. It's not the right page. All right, 205. I don't know why I wrote 180. She says, what is outstandingly clear in Pericles' formulations, and incidentally no less transparent in Homer's poems, is that the innermost meaning of the active deed in the spoken word is independent of victory. Right? This is a very important point of hers. Action doesn't depend on success. Some of the greatest actors, the freest people we know, are people who failed. Right? Napoleon, just to take, in the end, he's one of them. People who are killed for what they believe in or have done. Those are people who, in her mind, have acted. Unlike human behavior, and here behavior is being understood in opposition to action. Action can be judged. I'm skipping the parenthetical. Unlike human behavior, action can be judged only by the criteria of greatness, because it is in its nature to break through the commonly accepted and reach the extraordinary, where whatever is true in common and everyday life no longer applies, because everything that exists is unique and sui generis. So, action, to be free, is something that is outside of a moral standard. It's a very complicated and somewhat problematic claim. Her point is not that all action is good. Far from it. I don't think that's the claim at all. The point is, though, that action, which is a human capacity, is judged by its greatness, by its ability to be different and make you take notice of it. Some action needs to be judged evil and eviscerated. Other action needs to be embraced and welcomed. Some action we don't know about. Her worry in this section is not to say that action is all good or action is all bad, but that one of the human capacities of the human condition is to act. And it is being lost to the extent that we are so worried about the potential evil of great action that we suppress all action. Okay. I want to just speak briefly about the last chapter, which is the longest chapter in the book and the one that's least talked about often. It's called Vita Activa and the Modern Age. I'm going to try and be very brief. But here's how to read. Here's a map through it. Chapter 35, the first chapter in it, is on world alienation. And it deals with two major examples. First is the discovery of America and the mapping and exploration of the world. And the claim here on page 250 is that nothing can remain immense if it can be measured. As we, in the modern world, measure the whole world, nothing is left that's beyond measurement. Everything is thus relative, and there's nothing that deserves to be immortal. Everything is relative. This is part of what she calls world alienation. As we become to see everything is relative, we lose our engagement with the world. The second major event of the modern age, she says, is the expropriation of peasant land, in which all property, this is on page 252, all property was destroyed in the process of its appropriation, and all things devoured in the process of their production, and the stability of the world undermined in a constant process of change. So peasants had their land, and it wasn't much, but they at least had a spot, a place. And what happened with the expropriation of land is that we moved from thinking about wealth as connected to property and thought about wealth connected to wealth, money. And the result of that is that we get caught in this abstraction, this alienation, where we don't care about things, we just care about money and numbers. And we lose our connection to property, which, for all it's good or evil, at least is real and limited. And we can acquire an infinite amount of wealth. These two modes of alienation, she says, separate man from the world, the common world. We can acquire as much property as we want, we can map and explore, but we don't actually have to live anywhere. We think we know as much about, Africa as we do Red Hook, and it really doesn't matter, to a certain extent, where we are. We're alienated from our surroundings, she says. The second part of this chapter, section 36, is called The Discovery of the Archimedean Point, and it's, in my reading of the book, the most important chapter. It's on what she calls earth alienation, as opposed to world alienation. And the key line, the key event in earth alienation is the rise of modern science. And the rise of modern science, the key event in that is the discovery of the telescope by Galileo. So what she says on page 259 to 60 is this. What Galileo did, and what nobody had done before, was to use the telescope in such a way that the secrets of the universe were delivered to human cognition with the certainty of sense perception. That is, he put within the grasp of an earthbound creature and its body-bound senses what had seemed forever beyond his reach, at best open to the uncertainties of speculation and imagination. What science does is it reveals the secrets of the universe with a certainty that should have been accorded to sense perception. One thing it does is it then makes sense perception forevermore uncertain. And so we no longer trust our senses. We no longer trust our earthly selves. And truth becomes a matter of something that can only be known by scientists who look beyond the things of the earth. She calls this a rape on our senses. I know it's not a word we use today, but a rape on our senses. And she says on the next page, 262, the very top. The point is that both despair and triumph are inherent in the same event. We triumph with science. We come to know the world. Go back to the prologue, which we read. We can remake the world. And despair at the same time. In remaking the world, in making the world certain, we eviscerate part of our humanity, our freedom, our being subject to fate, our being unpredictable. If we can really program the world and make it knowable and make it predictable and make it perfect and rational, then we lose our earthliness. Earth is the quintessence of the human condition. The effort to find this certainty, this point from which we can fully understand the world, and the metaphor here is the Archimedean point, the point at which Archimedes could have said if he had a lever long enough, he could lever the world. Science seeks not an earthly knowledge, but what she calls a universal knowledge that is valid outside of the universe, in all places and all times in the universe, and thus one that is completely alienated from our human existence and our earthly existence. We seek a point of certainty, which of course is the extinction of freedom. Let me just end by pointing you towards the last couple pages, page 323. She says, she's here talking about these pages 320 to 323 are the most depressing pages you'll ever read. Don't read them without a nice glass of wine next to you. Keep the guns away and the knives away. But the nice thing about Arendt is every single one of her books ends optimistic. Right? She's not, and this is not just fake. This is integral to her philosophy, her thinking, which is that men are free. Her worry is that we're in the process of giving up our freedom. But because we are, as human, free, A, it will never happen completely. She fundamentally believes that. And B, we can always change it. This isn't our fate. This is just what's happening. And as long as we continue to think and act freely, and as long as some people care about monumentalizing those actions and thoughts that are unique and different, there will always remain at least spaces of freedom in the world, even if more and more the world becomes subject to predictableness, computer-like precision, bureaucracy, and mechanism. And then she says, and this is where she opens this up at the end on 323, needless to say, this does not mean that modern man has lost his capacities, or is on the point of losing them. No matter what sociology, psychology, and anthropology will tell us about the social animal, men persist in making, fabricating, and building, although these faculties are more and more restricted to the abilities of the artist, so that the concomitant experiences of worldliness escape more and more the range of ordinary human experience. Similarly, the capacity for action, at least in the sense of releasing of processes, is still with us, although it has become the exclusive prerogative of the scientist who have enlarged the realm of human affairs to the point of extinguishing the time-honored protective dividing line between nature and